everyone for coming out in this horrendous rain. I guess we have more weather coming down the pike Sunday into Monday, which with the saturated grounds is potentially a hazard for fallen trees and down wires. So just be aware of that. I did send the latest meteorologist report out to the LEPC just a little while ago, so you'll have that in your email as well. I'm going to just do a couple things so that Henry can have the rest of our time together. So I'd like to just cover a few quick items. As many of you know, our Emergency Preparedness and Fire Prevention Fair was held this past Saturday. This was our 5th annual event, and I believe that it was the most well-attended event that we've had. I think the weather had a lot to do with that. It was just a phenomenal day. The numbers that we came up with, 75 families participated in our passport program, which means that they had to visit at least 25 out of the 50 vendors that were there in order to receive a free prize, which is a little go kit, one for the kids or one for the adults. And 73 families participated in our raffle, so we were able to give away some great backpacks and emergency kits that are much needed in the community. And the sign-in sheet that we had 223 the sign-in sheet from Barnstable, Bourne, Mashpee. Not as many from different areas as last year. We had a few out-of-staters last year, didn't capture those this year, but still, and we figure there were a lot of people that just sort of passed by the welcome table, so if we add another 20% on there, we're looking at close to 300. So we're very, very pleased with those numbers as well. It was a great event. I put some paperwork up on the sign-in desk, just a few things for you to be aware of. Wacoit Bay is having their annual workshop. Are you ready for the next big storm? There's some great guest speakers. There's also going to be a panel discussion, so if anyone is interested, the dates and times of each of the panel discussions and the presentations are on the sheet there. That is Thursday, November 2nd from 9 to 3. I participated last year. It's a great event. As well, we have also on November 1st and 2nd is the 2017 MEMA All Hazards Conference. It's a 2-day conference in Worcester, and the last day to sign up for that is today. So there's information as well with regard to each day. There are repeat discussions and presentations, but on each individual day there are also some items that aren't repeated on the one of the 2 days. So there's an awful lot of information there. There's information for educators as well as emergency management, police and fire, and there's some well-renowned speakers at that event, and that again is on November 1st and 2nd at the DCU Center in Worcester. So I have the information with regard to sign up if anyone is interested in that. And with that, I will turn it over to Henry. Henry Brown is not only with Falmouth Amateur Radio Association, but he's also a member of our Community Emergency Response Team.
Thanks, Kim. I am Henry Brown. I am a ham radio operator in Falmouth. My call sign is K1WCC. I'm a licensed amateur, hold an extra class license. And I've been a member of the Falmouth Amateur Radio Association here since about 1993, I think. And so I'm here to talk to you a little bit about ham radio. Now, who's familiar with amateur radio? Anybody? I know there are a few hands here. We have Mel, Phil, Jerry over here who helped with the presentation, and myself. And I don't think anybody else here is licensed. Well, amateur radio, the amateur radio service is a federally licensed service, licensed by the FCC. You test for your license. You get a 10-year license, has to be renewed after 10 years at no cost, and it's a stepped type of license. Right now there are 3 active classes of licenses that are tested for. Let me see if I can bring this up here. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to pass these around. These are QSL cards, and they're interesting to read. These are cards that you get. Hams talk to somebody in a different country or in the same country or the same town, sometimes they exchange these postcards. And some of these are mine, and there's a couple that are very interesting. So I just pass them around, take a look at them. Two are from, one's from Cuba, one's from Russia. Two of them are local. So ham radio developed around 1910 or 1911 as an offshoot of all the radio activity that was going on. Marconi, Fessenden, people like that were really breaking ground. When you think about it, you could talk through the air to somebody a long way away. That was an enormous leap. It was sort of like akin to developing railroads in the 1830s and 40s. You could go from one place to another real quickly, whereas before you had to walk or take a horse. Well, in this case, you had one station and another station. You could communicate. It was a great thing. The licensing in the U.S. and other countries started about 1920. It's a service, federally licensed service. So we, with all the ramifications of being a service, we perform services. We're federally licensed to do these things. We have our own frequencies as well. We're often a primary and secondary communicator for public service events, and I'll talk about those in a minute, what we do. This is an interesting pic. I don't know if you recognize two of the people that are in here. You might not recognize the third person in the middle. That's Princess Elettra Marconi. She's Marconi's daughter, and she's often a visitor to the Cape, and I've had the privilege of meeting her about 3 times. She's an incredible woman, just the most gracious and nice person that you'd ever want to meet. And she was Marconi's youngest daughter. She's still alive, still promoting her father's legacy. And she loves the fact that there's the museum down at the Cape, and what you're looking at behind her is a replica of the original Marconi transmitter down at the Cape. You can see that if you go down to the Marconi Center down at the National Seashore. So we've got Guglielmo himself in front. So he was quite the guy, very innovative and quite the entrepreneur. So now, I've told you my call sign is K1WCC. Every ham gets a call sign. That's how you identify yourself. There are a number of websites where you can look up who owns which call sign. It's all fed by the FCC. People tap into their database and they get this information. The United States has A, K, W, and N as the prefixes for all the radio call signs. And you can see that WCIB down here with the big tower, if that were on the other side of the Mississippi River, would be K1, KC1B, KC1B. It sounds funny, but that's what it would be. That's not true with hams. We have Ks, Ns, Ws, As all over the country. It depends when you got your license and on a few other things. So if you got a license today, your license would start KC1 and then 3 letters. So it would be Kilo Charlie 1 XXX, whatever that would be. We operate under the FCC Part 97 rules. Hams are very, for the most part, very courteous, and on the air we don't generally bicker. We try to keep it clean, and that's generally true. It's not like a lot of people hear about CB radio. It can be nasty on the CB bands. It's really not that way on the amateur frequencies. So who can be a ham? Right now there's about 850,000 amateur operators in the United States. And if you don't have a felony conviction and you don't owe the IRS any back taxes, so I'm okay right now. So you can sit for an exam and be licensed. Right here in this town, every month, the Falmouth Amateur Radio Association gives exams. And we have our hams called volunteer examiners. I think Jerry might be one. Volunteer examiners sit and examine anyone who wants an amateur license. And it takes about a week for the FCC to get the data and post your license, and you have your new call sign, and you can get on the air. So Yeah, and one thing that people ask, you do not have to be a U.S. citizen to have a U.S. amateur radio license. As a matter of fact, licenses are tested for in countries like Russia. The U.S. Embassy would give amateur radio tests to Russian hams who may travel to the United States and may want to use a U.S. call sign. Other countries too. So it's a pretty friendly environment here at amateur radio. So there's 3 classes of amateur radio license. Technician class is the starting class. That's what you start out with. Some people will start with technician and then they'll go right up the ladder. You have to, it's progressive. You have to test for technician. Next one is general, and then the last one is expert. You have to have all those licenses in progression. But you get your technician license first. That allows you to do certain things. You can't operate on some of the lower bands, so the worldwide bands, but you can operate on VHF, you can operate on microwave, you can operate on satellites, you can operate on something called Echolink, D-Star. These are digital modes, and essentially you can do an awful lot of things with just an entry-level license. And forgive me on my numbers here, because I had to go way back and look, but there are about 350,000 technician class licenses in the United States. A lot of people use them for different reasons. Sometimes flying model airplanes, radio-controlled airplanes, drones. You need a license to use certain frequencies, so that's why they get a license like that. The next one is general class. There's about 170,000 general class licenses in the United States. You have all the privileges, but you just don't have all the bandwidth that the extra class license has. There's a lot of generals around. It gives you a lot of privileges, gives you a lot of things that you can do. And it takes about 25 hours of study if you study a book or if you study one of the online programs. Finally, there's extra class. It takes 30 to 40 hours roughly of accumulated study time. That's the top level license. You can operate on any legal ham radio frequency band with the extra class license. And there's about 140,000 extras in the United States right now. It takes some effort to get the license. There's a lot of math involved and whatever, but there are ways you can do it that are not difficult. So, let me go back here. And how many active hams are in the Falmouth area? There's about 200 in this, maybe, let's consider Falmouth, Mashpee, Bourne, maybe. There's about 200 hams. A lot of them have different interests. A lot of them have many different forms of equipment at the house. Some of them have incredible stations that can communicate worldwide, big antennas. It's a hobby that you can talk to Japan, you pick up the microphone, turn on your radio and your amplifier, and if the propagation is good, then you can talk to countries all over the world. Some of the hams in Falmouth are VHF hams. They're only interested in working on the repeaters, and I'll explain what that's all about in a minute. And as Jerry said earlier this morning when we were looking at this presentation, he said this presentation is encompasses a subject that's an inch thick and a mile wide, so we're only touching the surface here. Now, a lot of people say, well, what good is ham radio today with the internet? Well, you can see is a picture of the QST magazine, which has a circulation of about 160,000. It shows a bunch of young kids operating radios, and they're also operating computers. They may be logging at a contest. They may be using a digital mode, using the internet and radio, or whatever they're doing. But the internet complements amateur radio. There's not many ham radio shacks today or hams that are active that don't have a computer in their radio shack, which is a term where you keep your radios. It's not the company, which is not fun. So one of the things that we do, if you look over here, it's open now, it's rarely open. The Falmouth Aries, the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, has a station at the Falmouth Hospital. It's sort of similar to this. We've got a number of radios up there. We've got antennas all over the roof. We have one at the Falmouth High School shelter, and we have antennas up there that are capable of Cape-wide communications. And then we have this one at the EOC, right here, and we have the antennas up here. And we also have one at Joint Base Cape Cod. That's a pretty capable station. That's up there, right on the flight line. The EOC and the shelter stations, as it says here, are staffed during the activations. Some of us are CERT members. I am, and we go up there and we set up the radio and we stay in touch with the MAC down in Barnstable. I think it's the Mutual Agency Coordinating Committee. I think that's what it's called, right? Do I have that right?
I think it's multi-agency.
Multi-agency, yeah, okay. And that's people like Comcast are there, the Eversource, all the agencies that serve us and need to know when there are problems. We also communicate from the shelter to the EOC by radio. And one time when we activated the shelter, that was the only way that the shelter could communicate to the EOC was by amateur radio. There was problems associated with the building, I think, and it was an issue. But that was Hurricane Sandy, I think, if I recall. And all the other Cape shelters also are staffed with amateur operators. The REPC takes care of the rest of them, and they're all staffed with those operators. Also, the CERT van, some of you know that CERT now has a pretty nice emergency management van. That has a radio similar to this one over here inside. And some of the CERT members are licensed amateur operators, so they can use that radio. And Falmouth and Cape Cod Aries, the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, we meet and drill regularly. Some of you know Frank O'Laughlin. Frank's a meteorologist, and he's also the head of the Cape Cod Aries operation. And he's real big on drills and getting us out and getting us doing things. We operate in bad weather, just things you might run into. And just remembering that all the services we perform are voluntary. All of our equipment is purchased by us. It doesn't cost the town a cent. And although the town has in the past purchased some equipment for us, and for that we've been grateful, but lately that hasn't been the case. So if we needed it, we'd ask. So, but we don't. And how are HAMS helping the local emergency preparedness efforts? We have 4 repeaters in the town of Falmouth. Now a repeater, some of you may be familiar with how they work. You take a radio like this one here. This is a handy talkie. It's a high quality amateur handy talkie. It costs about $150. But it's only a 5-watt radio. It doesn't transmit on with 100 watts or 25 or 30 watts. So we have a repeater up at the hospital. So if I wanted to get into that repeater with 5 watts and talk to somebody, say in Warren or Plymouth or somewhere like that, I could do that. Because this transmits to the repeater, which then takes the signal and retransmits it at a much higher power. And being a higher antenna, they have much greater range. So that's how a repeater works. Right now there's a repeater at the hospital. There are 2 repeaters at the dump, on the dump tower, and there are other repeaters in town that will remain anonymous, but the repeaters are a very effective way to communicate with a low-powered radio or a mobile radio that we can access. We do exercises with MEMA in Bridgewater, We can get repeated here, we can get all the way up to, say, Taunton, Plymouth, New Bedford, Newport, and in some cases, it's during certain times when there's what they call a lift on. You can get much further than that, way up into New Hampshire, whatever, but that's not a common thing. All the repeaters are privately maintained, and they are at no cost. We're grateful to the agencies that do allow us to put the repeaters where they are. So it works well for us. We have what's called a D-Star repeater. It's privately owned. That allows digital communications worldwide. And we also have what's called a DMR repeater, same type of thing. It's up in Bourne. Same thing. You can pick up a DMR radio and talk to somebody in California or England or whatever, just like we're talking right now. So they have that capability. And I think I already explained, this is what a repeater does. We're very fortunate to have as many repeaters as we do. There's one down in Dennis, there's one in Barnstable, there's one at the Samara Radio Club in Dartmouth. These are all good, strong, long-range repeaters in the area. So. And they all have emergency power capability. Now, one thing people ask, is ham radio expensive to get into? Well, it can be. Some people have stations that are probably worth $50,000 to $100,000 if you add up all the equipment. Some people have stations that are worth $150. That's the price of an HT like this, and they can even be less expensive. A lot of people like to build their own equipment. They're electrical engineers or not. They just like doing things like that. That radio over there, I found that cooler at a yard sale. It's a 6-pack cooler. I just said, hey, that'd make a good radio case. It's got a set of batteries in it. It'll operate all day. Just pick it up and carry it around. Put it in your car, use it in the car. This works good. Also up there, I have a what's called a Bioenno battery. It's a lithium iron battery. That battery is as light as a feather. You should pick it up and try it. But that will provide power for a long, long time. Much different than a lead acid or a gel cell battery. And they're not cheap, but they're incredible. So we have people invest in those kind of things. They like experimenting with them, and they have a good time doing it. Let's go back here. So we have an exclusive right worldwide to a wide range of frequencies. Most countries can access the same frequencies that another country can. It's interchangeable. A lot of people transmit regularly to Europe, to the West Coast, to Japan, to Australia, Russia. There's the only restrictions used to be you couldn't transmit to certain communist countries and things like that. You can go, well, that's all gone away. A lot of that's gone. North Korea does not allow any license damages. So that's a country that if a guy goes there with a ham radio, everybody will want to talk to him. And that's happened once in the past few years. But this weekend is a contest. Contesting is very popular. People get on the air and they try to make as many contacts as they can. And this is called CQ Worldwide is coming up this weekend, and it's tens of thousands of amateurs will be on the air. The radio is no place to be this weekend unless you're a contestant. So finally, this quote by Edward R. Murrow I thought was pretty interesting. Just because your voice reaches halfway around the world doesn't mean you are wiser than when it reached only to the end of the bar. And of course, he was some of you guys are too young to remember Murrow, but I do remember his voice when I was a kid hearing him on the radio. He was a broadcaster par excellence, and he set a lot of standards for CBS News. So that is ham radio, and we're here, we're in your community, we're part of the LEPC. We're always looking for new members. The Falmouth Amateur Radio Association has about 150 members. And our meetings, we meet in here. In fact, we're meeting tonight. We usually have about 40 people at each meeting. It's a good group. We're very interested in technical subjects. We may not be as social as some clubs are very socially oriented. The Falmouth Amateur Radio Association is, I think, probably a more technically oriented club. But we have a Christmas party every year at the yacht club. We have a club shack out at the base. We meet here. We do a field day out at in June out at the fairgrounds. Thanks to the fairgrounds for that, by the way. And we also do a few other things. For example, we were at the fair, the safety fair, and we set up there and we did the jamboree on the air. The Boy Scouts came and they talked to other scouts around. We had a complete circuit set up between Falmouth and Camp Greeno down there, when some of the scouts got on the radio and got to talk to each other, and that was really good. I think they all had a great time there. It was most enjoyable. We had about probably 10 or 11 FARA members kind of mentoring the scouts, Boy and Girl Scouts. So.
Don't forget the road race and
yeah, we do. We also provide communications, secondary communications, backup communications for the Falmouth Road Race, and we are primary communicators for the Cape Cod Marathon, which is coming up on Sunday. And we provide the communications. We set up our net control right in here, and we do that for the road race as well. And we communicate with hams all over the course and the vehicles and whatever. So that works out really well. Plus, there's a lot of opportunities for public service. I just got done on Sunday working up at the head of the Charles Regatta. I've done that for many years as a radio operator on a what's called a safety launch there. I'd say they have about probably over 100 hams that provide comms for the head of the Charles. You've probably heard of the Boston Marathon. Hams are probably over 200 provide backup communications there. Very active. All these little events, these runs. I do communications coordinator for the CF Ride for Life over in Westport every September. Mel helped me out this year because I couldn't be there, so he took over. It's a great opportunity to do good things for people and have fun doing it. So that's how we look at it. And I want to ask anybody have any questions?
Henry, what would the benefits of ham radio be in a situation like Puerto Rico right now where there's no power, no cell towers, lack of communication?
Yeah, most hams have some alternate means of power. A lot of them have generators. The Honda EU2000 is very popular among hams. It's a quiet, efficient little generator, inverter type. I'm sure there are a lot of those down there in Puerto Rico right now. A lot of the Puerto Rican hams are no different than American hams, because they are, and they have they're very capable guys down there, and I'm sure they were set up and ready for the storm. And a lot of communications are going back and forth between Puerto Rico and the United States. Message traffic, health and welfare traffic, all kinds of things. And it would happen here too if there was a complete shutdown of power. It's hard to believe that being the case here, but if it was, we'd be able to get on the air and communicate with MEMA and with other hams outside the area. So we're a resource in that sense too. But I was amazed at how quickly this all came together with the amateurs. We have something called the Cape and Islands Traffic Net every night on one of the repeaters. And I have a cousin down in Puerto Rico, so I passed a message down to him by traffic, what we call NTS traffic. And that's very helpful. Other people in town have asked if they could do that. We sent messages. So, but they're getting things together now down there, I think. So, Jerry?
Yeah, you may want to, well, they'll dug into it a little bit further in Puerto Rico. Salvation Army turned up a network for it. It was called Satin. That was running 24/7 and doing kind of the same thing Henry was talking about, passing messages. So people would go to locations and then pass messages on to the states and then vice versa. The ARRL agency sent over 50 hams to go down. And the big thing that they were going down for, that they ended up not expecting to do this, is they drove in the power trucks. Because the utilities have no communications. So all their equipment went down. So all these contractors and other people going to Puerto Rico, they had no communication. And it's something that you never faced anywhere else, and you won't hear much about it, is none of these vehicles can communicate with each other. So you got people that don't know where they're going. And again, as you know, fire department, police services is turning up the plant is you got to have people out there that know what they're doing, but also communicating back to the network that I'm activating this circuit over here and I'm doing this. So people complain that it doesn't come up fast enough, but it's pretty tough down there. So they're putting an infrastructure together that have the utilities be able to talk to each other. And Google has got balloons up.
Yeah.
They're using balloons as basically towers to get antennas up in the air because there's no towers. And Puerto Rico is a mountainous country, and that's a problem for point-to-point communication. We use skywave and ground waves. They're mostly, like public service radios, they're point-to-point. So that everything could possibly go wrong. For disaster went wrong there, and a lot of criticism. But the communications aspect of it is actually the harder part because they can't get the plant, so they can't get the power up, they can't get the phone, the internet, the cable companies, and it's down to the basic communications. All the radio companies and sent radios down there, batteries, generators are being sent down, but it's still just hard work at doing distributed because of such devastation of power. So, sorry for cutting in.
Well, I think there's a group called I guess, it's called the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL, and they're the spokespeople for ham radio in the United States. There's a lot of members, a lot of hams are members of this group, and they're very organized, and they have probably 50 of these kits made up, which include batteries, radios, everything that you need, and they can send them to a disaster right away, and they send them with people, like Jerry said. I don't know if it was Saturn that got the volunteers, but somebody got 50 hams to volunteer and go down there. Experienced.
ARRL did.
Yeah, experienced operators. They went down, and they went down for like 3 weeks, I think, and I think they're coming back now. But they were down there. They set up the radios. It's what works.
One of them was a Kansas City Fire Department.
Yeah, I've given you some things here to read. So. All right, so if you're interested in amateur radio, just happen to be, you can talk to Mel, Phil, myself, Jerry. You see Phil and Mel and myself here most meetings. So be happy to introduce you to it. And there's a little bit of a display over there. So. And one thing here, I'll leave you with this. Somebody about 10 years ago made up a whole bunch of bumper stickers, tens of thousands of them, and you used to see these on ham's cars. It says, "Ham radio saves lives." It was a commercial company that did it. But it didn't matter because it was true. This sprang out of Katrina. And during Katrina, there were hospitals in New Orleans that had no communications other than amateurs that were there. That was it. That was the only communications they had. And from that, it sprang some of the activities that are going on at all the hospitals around, I guess, around the United States. We have once a month what's called the Southeastern Mass Hospital Net. Now, if you're familiar with some of the local hospitals, St. Luke's in New Bedford, Toby, South Shore, Charlton in Fall River, Sturdy in Attleboro, Falmouth, all have amateur stations. And one day a month, on a Saturday morning, we get together on the air just to assure that we can continue to communicate in the event of an emergency. And it's important to hospitals because they don't keep a lot of supplies at any given hospital. They depend on the just-in-time system of getting materials, because things are expensive to hold once you buy them. So keeping in touch, asking Cape Cod Hospital, what do you have? South Shore Hospital, you have this, we need that, in a serious emergency. Could be important, so this is why we do that too. So, Phil?
Henry, you might want to explain about the map that we had in here and the APRS that we were using during the road races and the ability to be able to track vehicles throughout the town.
Right, there's a ham radio service called APRS, Automatic Packet Reporting System. And a lot of hams have that built into their radios. Even a radio this small would have a GPS, and it would transmit your position at any given time. So if you're driving around in your car, somebody could go on the APRS website and see where you are. You can do that. You don't need a license to look at that website. We used to do it right here during the Cape Cod Marathon, when we would set up some of the trail cars and the chase cars with APRS, and you could look at the map right up here. It would be displayed on the screen. We had to use the projector, and you could see where these places, these cars were. So if somebody said we have an emergency or we need more water at a certain place, we'd say, well, it's trail car 10 or whatever is at this particular location. You can hurry up over there and do this. It's very useful. We don't do that right now, but that is an available service, and any ham can do APRS. It's pretty popular. You can also message that way too. You can send messages by APRS. So it's an interesting way of doing things. Automatic packet reporting system, invented by a guy down at the Naval Academy. Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks for listening. We try to help whenever we can. So, and we're meeting here tonight, 7 o'clock, if you want to come in. So, thank you.